David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So yesterday we talked about these very, very unusual and sort of seemingly pointless in some way retweets by the president, Donald Trump, of some anti-Muslim videos. He retweeted 3 absolutely insane videos, supposedly of Muslims committing different acts of violence from an extreme right group's member in the UK. The group is called Britain First, and the tweets were from Jada Franson. Now, of the 3 videos, yesterday I already told you we knew that one of the 3 was fake in the sense that it was not actually what it claimed to be. It was not a video of a Muslim attacking anyone. It was a non-immigrant, non-Muslim Dutch guy. But that didn't really matter, right? The main point was, this is understandably concerning behavior. Why is an American president retweeting this stuff? And it apparently was as concerning to British Prime Minister Theresa May as it was to many of us. She criticized Donald Trump for those retweets. May said after Trump did this retweeting that Trump was wrong to have retweeted the videos. Not hugely controversial, but still, it is the prime minister of a foreign ally that is saying the president did not do the right thing. What did Trump do? He took to Twitter. He took to Twitter, as he often does, initially tagging a different Theresa May, who has only 6 followers on Twitter, and then in normal Donald Trump fashion, eventually taking that tweet down in his endless comedy of errors and tweeting the actual British Prime Minister, where he said, Theresa May, don't focus on me. Focus on the destructive radical Islamic terrorism that is taking place within the United Kingdom. We're doing just fine. And as I read this, I found myself asking, is this the real life or is it just fantasy? Because the idea of Donald Trump telling others not to focus on him, that's hilarious, right? Given that all Trump wants other people to do is to focus on him. And only in the world of the low information Trumpist is this type of behavior from a president something we could even imagine being remotely pleased with. Many Trumpists actually support Trump, not despite this type of stuff, going on Twitter and criticizing the leader of a foreign ally, but because of it. They hear this and they say, hey, listen, Trump does politics differently, and that's a good thing. We should all be glad that Donald Trump is not like the other politicians. You can make that case, but explain specifically how the retweeting of the Muslim hate videos and the slamming of leaders of allied countries via Twitter accomplishes any political objective. I would actually want to hear from a Trumpist to say, hey, here's why we should be glad that Trump retweeted those videos and then slammed Theresa May on Twitter. This is one of the U.S.'s closest allies. They are understandably increasingly skeptical of sharing information with us after Trump opened his mouth to Russians about information shared by Israel in the Oval Office, information from another ally. And then now Trump takes to Twitter to attack the prime minister. And it's mostly sad because even if Trumpists like it, we all suffer from Trump making the U.S. an international embarrassment. When Trump damages our relationship with the UK or with Israel or whoever, right? The Trumpists might like it because for them, it's Trump being the strong man who's not going to be pushed around. The progressives don't like it, but everybody is impacted by it. If the UK says this guy is unhinged, we're not going to share information with the US anymore. It's not going to make a difference whether you voted for Trump or Hillary or whoever. It's bad for you.
Yeah, you have to know how to pick your battles, too. I mean, he shouldn't have retweeted these posts to begin with.
Sure.
But then after that, let Theresa May say her piece. I mean, they are, after all, our top ally. They're both right-wingers, too. It's all just very surprising. And maybe once he found out that he had retweeted the wrong person,
then he said, well, now I've got to do it. I got to. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think he can hold back. I think that the pick your battles implies that there's some critical thinking going on where Trump is actually evaluating, like, okay, let me think. Is this worth tweeting about or is it not? Maybe I should save some of my Twitter capital or whatever for something else. I don't think that's going on. I think the guy can't control himself. And anytime anyone says anything, he takes to Twitter, and nobody in that Oval Office or around the president can get him not to do it. This entire thing is making me more convinced than ever that what we know of as the universe is actually a computer simulation, and you and I, Pat, have been randomly assigned to the madman in the White House test scenario. I know that it's actually a hypothesis that many astrophysicists, scientists of different kinds have talked about. Could we be living in a simulation? If we are, I've definitely gotten the short end of the stick in terms of which simulation I'm in.
I wish I was selected for something else.
Yeah, I would like to be in the Bernie Sanders wins and we figure out what happens if you actually have a democratic socialist as president of the United States. That's the simulation I'd like to be chosen for. We've been having this discussion for a long time. And the main question of the discussion is, why does Donald Trump lie about such meaningless things in provably, demonstrably false ways, right? He appears to be a pathological liar. That's been one assessment. Or maybe not. There's new reporting from the Washington Post and the New York Times, which is very interesting. And if you pay close attention to what these reports say, it seems to suggest there's a growing theory that Trump's not lying when he says this insane stuff, but that Trump may actually be delusional and might believe it. Now, what do I mean by that? Donald Trump reportedly lies in private in front of just a few people in his inner circle about many of the same things that he lies about in public. He might actually be this disconnected from reality. Here's one example. The birther thing with the former president, Barack Obama, it's been long resolved, right? President Obama, he has a birth certificate, he was born in the US, whatever. Trump in private reportedly still talks about how he doesn't believe Obama was born in the United States. There's no evidence for that. In private, Donald Trump is still saying he doesn't know where President Obama was born. He thinks that the birth certificate may have been doctored. Another example, voter fraud. Donald Trump said publicly after the 2016 election that he would have won the popular vote were it not for 3 to 5 million people who illegally voted for Hillary Clinton. He is reportedly continuing to talk about that in private, which again suggests he might really believe it. It's not just to rile up his base. Trump is in private telling people that Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller is going to end his investigation into possible Russian collusion by the end of this year. It's a month away. We have only 3 indictments so far and 1 guilty plea from George Papadopoulos. There is no way in hell that this thing is wrapping up by the end of the year. It's not even likely, to be perfectly frank, that it wraps up by the end of 2018. And Trump is in private reportedly saying that it's going to end within a month. Earlier this week, I told you that now Donald Trump is questioning the authenticity of that infamous Access Hollywood grab him by the you-know-what recording. And we wondered, how is it that Donald Trump is questioning the authenticity of something he already admitted was real and apologized for? He is reportedly continuing to question the authenticity of the grab him by the you-know-what tapes in private. Donald Trump might truly believe that the Access Hollywood tape was doctored. Now, there's a couple possibilities here if we try to understand this. One is, well, maybe Trump is lying even to his own staff, and he knows that he's lying. But that would be really weird, right? Like, what would be the point of Trump lying even in a room with just a few of his closest advisors about this stuff? It really doesn't make sense. But it would sort of explain why Trump told such pointless and self-defeating lies over and over again, which is he really believes them and he's not connected to reality. So I think that this is a very interesting thing. We know that Trump watches Fox and Friends and takes it as gospel. He repeats conspiracy theories from InfoWars. He genuinely might not even realize that Russia manipulated him throughout the election. Trump might be actually telling us what he sees as the truth.
And if he is just delusional, it kind of exonerates him in some way.
Well,
because then he's not lying, right? Then he's not going out there and trying to deceive. I mean, it would make him unfit to be president, but it's not unethical, really.
It would make him less of a despisable guy, but even more clearly unfit for the presidency, right? If you think about for a second, what's more dangerous? A president who lies that climate change is a hoax created by the Chinese in order to further his own political goals, or a president who actually believes that climate change is a hoax created by the Chinese. I think it's far more dangerous to have a guy in the Oval Office who believes that than the guy who's lying about it to rile up his base.
Certainly more dangerous.
So how does this connect to some of the other stuff we've been talking about? Well, we don't want to diagnose people from afar, but there have been a number of different medical experts who say, Donald Trump might be experiencing early signs of dementia. It's unclear whether he may be cognitively limited in some other ways. This level of delusion, where Donald Trump actually believes this stuff, may in some way fit into that. And it can become, delusions in general, delusions of grandeur, which Donald Trump certainly has, and just general delusions of easily, demonstrably, provably false ideas from the real world. That can kind of interrelate with signs and symptoms of dementia as well. It can be sort of hard to distinguish. Will we ever really know the answer? I genuinely have no idea. If there
was ever a time to use the 25th Amendment, I think it would be now. You gotta get on
Arguably
that.
so. And that's another, and I know people write in all the time, they say, David, the impeachment for Russia stuff isn't going to happen. If there's going to be a removal of Trump from the presidency, it's going to be an invocation of the 25th Amendment, which I think generally, Pat, is something like, if the president is determined to be incapable of doing the basic tasks of office, I don't remember how it's
cabinet
worded.
members would get together and impeach him in that way.
They would decide in a different way, yeah. I don't think any of it's going to happen, but increasingly there's as strong a case being made for a use of the 25th Amendment as there is for the Russia collusion stuff. Send me your thoughts on that last question, though. What's worse, Trump lying about some of these things or Trump actually believing some of these things? Which do you think is worse? I think that the delusion part is much more concerning in terms of his fitness for the presidency. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day at davidpakman.com is Ryan Wolfslave. Ryan, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Membership and Patreon are the two top ways to support the work that we do. We are mostly a viewer and listener supported program. So consider joining Ryan. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up. You can make a pledge of as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. And 2018 David Pakman Show calendars available at davidpakman.com/calendar18. Our David Pakman Show subreddit continues to grow. Nearly 5,000 of our viewers and listeners now are regularly participating there. You can find it at davidpakman.com/reddit. I was browsing the subreddit this morning, found some interesting discussions that I wanted to share with you, starting with no less than a discussion about what we can actually expect to happen, what seems more like when rather than if net neutrality is repealed. And it's a very interesting discussion of, okay, we hear the generalities about the dangers of a net neutrality repeal, but what could the internet actually be like if and when that takes place? Good discussion. Also from our Reddit discussion forum, a correction, which is an absolutely accurate one. I gave an incorrect example of how net neutrality could impact Netflix by talking about Time Warner as the owner of Time Warner Cable and thus the owner of HBO. And as it actually stands, Time Warner Cable and Time Warner, the parent company, did separate some time ago. So I should have picked other examples for that analogy or that explanation. So I stand corrected on the specifics, but there are numerous other examples that are very similar.
One of them should have changed their name to avoid confusion to begin with.
I know, yeah. But hey, a lot of brand loyalty associated, mostly negative. People hate their cable companies, but at least brand recognition, I guess we would call it. Also from the Reddit discussion forum, what do you think Trump will, where do you think Trump will spend his post-president life? I'm more interested in what Trump will do after he's no longer president of the United States. Like, will it be enough to just go back and sit in his office with his fake Time magazine covers, making different deals for building real estate by hiring undocumented immigrants and the entire thing? Like, will that satisfy him after being president? I don't know.
Are we talking about the recreation hour you get in jail?
If Donald Trump ever did go to jail or prison or whatever, I don't assume he would be particularly active during his hour in the exercise yard. Don't take my word for it. Just look at the guy on the golf course. Okay, also from our Reddit discussion forum, how do you feel about David's use of clickbait titles? This is a funny, for people who listen to the podcast or watch the show on TV, you aren't aware of the, quite frankly, pretty clever titles that we come up with for our YouTube videos. And I reject the idea of the term clickbait. We come up with titles that reflect the content of the video, but are as interesting as possible, right? Why would we pick titles that won't make people want to watch the clip? So yes, we deliberately pick the titles that we think will get the most attention for the video, with the understanding that it has to reflect the subject matter of the video. If that's clickbait, then call me Clickbait Johnny.
And I would recommend your interview of Sargon of Akkad on this topic too.
That was quite a discussion, absolutely. Or not? Was it a takedown, or did we? Oh no, we did talk about clickbait.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, years ago during the Gamergate days. And lastly, what's up with the website? Why is the David Pakman Show website only showing the shows from last week, et cetera, et cetera? A number of questions and comments about what the hell happened to the David Pakman Show website over the last couple days. I will address that in the next segment. You can join us on Reddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Okay, let's talk about the David Pakman Show website. Many of you, hundreds of people emailing in saying, David, a bunch of shows are gone from davidpakman.com. I'm a member, but I can't log in at davidpakman.com. The website is totally down. I can't access anything. Here's what happened. We launched the new David Pakman Show website in August of 2016, a little over a year ago. And the website was 100-fold better than the old David Pakman Show website. And it was absolutely fantastic. However, what we didn't account for was that the hosting recommendation we got from GoDaddy, our now former web host, was not the best recommendation. And as the website grew with more and more members and more content and a bigger and bigger audience, the hosting we had was no longer able to handle the demands on server resources from our website. So the website became very slow. The website would often crash at key times of the day, like after posting new episodes at 4, 5, 6 p.m. Eastern time. And it was an absolute and total disaster. And this kind of, the straw that broke the camel's back took place late Monday evening, very early Tuesday morning, when some updates to our website completely crashed the site and effectively made it unusable. And we've been delaying moving to a better, more robust web host for a while. But this made it pat so that we just said, hey, you know what? The website's already down.
That's it.
That's it. This is as good a time as any to go into what I'm calling emergency migration mode. And we did that. So the brand new davidpakman.com is now up and running. And thanks to some really great and speedy work from our tech team, including our great developer, Katie, who took a break from mom duty with her 2 kids to help out, as well as our migration technician, who was up until 5:30 a.m. this morning dealing with this. The David Pakman Show website is now many times faster than it ever was. And it's so fantastic. And it's not just great for the audience, by the way. When the website is slow for you, it's slow for us as well. And it's not good. So we're really pleased with this. A few important things. Number 1, membership. If it seems like your membership isn't working, please fully log out, clear your cookies, and try to log back in. This will fix 99% of the issues. Basically, what happened is that your browser still has a cookie that has you logged in to the website, but the website has been moved onto a different server. And so it's creating a conflict and telling people that they're not actually members when they are. So please sign out, clear cookies, sign back in. That will most likely fix the issue. If you signed up over the last 24 to 72 hours, it actually is possible that your membership isn't recognized, because there was a period there where the version of the website that was migrated was about 24 hours old at the time of migration. So some recent members may not be recognized. If that's the case, just email me and I will help you, okay? And then also, for about 3 hours, the calendar page was completely down. We've set up a page, davidpakman.com/calendar18. So you can get your David Pakman Show calendars for next year. You can get them free with a membership or just the calendar. That page was not working for about 3 hours. It is back up, okay? So if you were trying to get the calendar yesterday and couldn't, that page is back up. Great news overall. Anytime we transition, there's always some growing pains or some interim period that's not as good. But now we're left with a much faster website, and I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad news if you prefer slower, unreliable websites,
Yes.
but for everyone
Good
else,
news,
it's good.
good news if you've been sick and tired of the slowness on the website, which I have been. So that's that. All right. As you probably have been following, Roy Moore is an Alabama Republican Senate candidate. He's been accused of sexual assault by multiple women, including at least one woman who was underage at the time of the incident. He dropped in the polls precipitously last week, the week before, and I said to you, don't pay attention to it. Doesn't matter that a bunch of polls say that Doug Jones, the Democratic challenger, is ahead. I said, do not pay attention to it. There have been a number of factors that I have been concerned would actually help Roy Moore. Number one is the fact that a lot of voters just forget about stuff after a week. And after we don't have the Roy Moore sexual assault allegations in the news for 24 hours a day or however many hours a day it was, a lot of voters would forget about it. They'd say, wait, I'm a Republican. Of course I'm going to vote for Roy Moore. The other issue is that some of the allegations against others in the last couple of weeks, Al Franken, John Conyers, even the non-politicians like Charlie Rose and Matt Lauer, I said, it's going to help Roy Moore. And indeed, it is happening. Roy Moore is surging in Alabama. If you look at recent polls, there was this brief period where Doug Jones was actually tied or even ahead in a number of polls. And now we are basically back to Roy Moore leading all recent polls by 2, 5, and 6 recently in 3 recent polls. The Real Clear Politics average right now has Roy Moore ahead by an average of 2 percentage points. Remember, evangelical voters don't actually care about Roy Moore being accused of child sexual assault. They supposedly are mostly adherents to a religion that dictates that they should care about this. But it's been abundantly clear from the start that if you are Roy Moore, you just wait it out. Donald Trump waited it out. More than a dozen accusers, including, remember, a girl who was 13 years old at the time that she says Donald Trump raped her, had accused Donald Trump. He waited it out. He waited out the grab him by the pee tapes from Access Hollywood. He's president. He's president of the United States. There was no doubt that Roy Moore just had to wait this out. Another interesting element is that right when the first accusation against Roy Moore went public, Alabamans searching for, is it Alabamans or Alabamians? Alabamians.
Yes.
Okay, I stand corrected. Alabamians started searching for Roy Moore a lot on the internet. As soon, and the polling numbers for Roy Moore went down. As soon as a week went by and the stories came out of the news, Alabamians stopped searching for Roy Moore nearly as much, and his polling started going back up. It also probably is sort of helping Roy Moore that Donald Trump kind of pseudo-endorsed him. It was no big ringing endorsement of Roy Moore, but it was the type of thing that it was kind of a signal to Republicans that, listen, Donald Trump says it's okay to vote for Roy Moore, and a lot of those Republicans are going to. And I believe that the bottom line here is actually even more disturbing. It's not that for a while Roy Moore lost support. There was a period where Roy Moore supporters were just not admitting that they were still going to support Roy Moore. There is no way that voters really switched in such significant numbers away from Roy Moore and then back to Roy Moore in a week or 10 days. They were always for Roy Moore. Some of them just lied about it when they were being polled during the time of the allegations, often claiming that they were undecided or that they weren't sure if they were voting at all, or maybe even some of them saying they were going to vote for Doug Jones. They didn't really switch. They just lied. They were always going to support Roy Moore.
And remember what Roy Moore said after these allegations broke?
No.
That it was just a hit piece by the Washington Post, and it was all done by the liberal mainstream media to take him down 6 weeks before the election. If it actually was, wouldn't they wait a week or two before the election? Why would they do it 6 weeks before?
That
gives you time to recover.
If indeed it was a fake story just meant as a hit piece, you'd want to do it. You'd want to time it in a way that it would most impact the election results, not 6 weeks before. And there's kind of this ironic thing where conservative Southern Republicans don't like how they're perceived by us elite Northeastern liberals in cities. Well, maybe take a moral stand and don't vote for the accused serial child sexual assaulter, and you'll gain some more respect from the so-called Northeastern liberal elites. This is tribalism taken to the extreme. If Hitler appeared and ran as a Republican, they would find some way to say, hey, listen, we don't want the Democrat to be here because the Democrat's going to do all this really bad stuff. And if Jesus Christ himself materialized in front of us and said, I'm a progressive Democrat and I'm running for Senate in Alabama, you'd have these same people saying, Jesus lost his way and we're going to vote for the Republicans.
It's like that Trump supporter who said that he'd have to check with the president first, right? Before taking Jesus' side.
If Jesus said, what was it? Something like if Jesus said there was Trump-Russia collusion,
yes,
the voter would say, hold on, Jesus, I'm going to check with Donald Trump first. Donate, phone bank, and knock on doors in Alabama. Okay, donate, phone bank, and knock on doors, because as I said before, those polls could not be trusted, and there's a good chance that Roy Moore is going to win this special election on December 12th. Join us on our subreddit, discuss this or anything else, davidpakman.com/REDVIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're continuing our conversation with Andrew Torrez, who's a graduate of Harvard Law. He's been practicing law for 21 years, and he co-hosts the Opening Arguments Show, the legal podcast that helps you make sense of the news. So yesterday we spoke in part one of the interview about net neutrality. I want to get your thoughts a little bit on the Robert Mueller investigation that's been going on. My non-lawyer interpretation of how Robert Mueller has been going about this investigation is that he is doing it in an incredibly competent way, systematically working through interviews and documents, early indictments, I would guess strategically selected in order to maybe set up bigger indictments down the line through the use of leverage. What's your sense of it? I mean, do you get the same sense I do as a general thing?
Yeah, so short answer, yes. But because you have a lawyer on the show, you're going to get a long answer as well. And I want to say as a caveat, I'm a civil litigator. I work with startups and small businesses. But as the co-host of the Opening Arguments Show, I started getting these questions pretty much the day after Trump's inauguration, because there were sort of very plainly criminal activities taking place. The most obvious was the president naming Jared Kushner to the White House staff. It's an obvious violation of the anti-nepotism statute. But the only real remedy that we have is through impeachment. So obviously, that's kind of the context for the Mueller investigation as it's going to affect the president. The president is not going to be tried. The question is whether this is going to set up appropriate swings in public opinion such that Republicans come on board and are willing to vote for impeachment. With all that as background, you hit the nail exactly on the head. The one thing I tell people over and over again in my conversations with prosecutors, I worked very closely with white-collar criminal defense attorneys for 15 years. I have friends who were federal judges. In my experience and in my conversations with them, the one thing they tell me over and over again is in a normal, non-political, non-media heavy case, these are 2-3 year investigations. It's a slow process. And again, that dovetails with my experience in large civil litigation. You've got, because if you watch Law and Order TV shows, you flip witnesses in 20 minutes and then get them to testify. These are, as we've seen from like the Manafort indictment that came down, these are bad guys who are associated with the inner circle of the president. And one of the duties that Robert Mueller has is to prosecute everybody who's committed a crime while making the best possible case against the ringleaders and all the way up to the office of the president. So take Manafort, for example. You might think that as a matter of kind of law and order type strategy, we'll just give Manafort immunity and have him flip and testify against the president, and then boom, you're done. But part of what Mueller is trying to figure out is how well can I make the case without having to give Manafort immunity? Because he's committed again, he's allegedly committed, according to the indictment, tens to hundreds of millions of dollars in tax fraud, in laundering money from the Ukraine. Again, those are allegations. I want to be clear on that. But if that's the case, and clearly indictments were handed down, so Mueller thinks that there's a strong probability that that's the case. You need to figure out, do I let somebody who has defrauded the U.S. out of hundreds of millions of dollars, who I think has defrauded the U.S. out of hundreds of millions of dollars, walk to make a political case against the president? And all of that requires basically doing your homework, collecting as much information, going through it in a thorough way. And the Republican strategy has been to try and convince the public that it should be the opposite, right? Like, oh, well, we should have an answer by now, and the investigation should be done. It's a slow process.
So one of the common talking points from the nothing to see here crowd, which exists on both the left and right for different reasons, but we don't have to get into that aspect of it today, is, listen, David, everything that's coming out so far relates to possible crimes that have nothing to do with collusion between the Donald Trump campaign and Russian actors. It's financial fraud committed before these people. Paul Manafort, for example, worked for Trump, or whatever the case may be. Can we first define collusion itself is not a crime? So what sorts of specific crimes might be possible under this general umbrella of colluding with Russia?
Yeah. So you're right, and the nothing to see here crowd is technically correct that collusion isn't a crime. But what is a crime is conspiracy. And in particular, there's a statute, it's 18 U.S. Code Section 371, that is conspiracy to defraud the United States. And it's a really, it's a 3-line statute. It says if 2 or more persons conspire to commit any offense against the United States or to defraud the United States or any agency thereof for any purpose, and one or more of those do any act to affect the conspiracy, then they've committed the crime, and it carries up to a 5-year prison sentence. Manafort is charged with conspiracy to defraud the U.S. It's true that a lot of the counts relate to tax fraud, as we've said, but the idea that you would dismiss that as not being significant is kind of beyond me. And I want to be clear. There are multiple cases. There's a Supreme Court case that goes back to 1924. It's called Hammerschmidt v. U.S. That explicitly says that conspiracy to defraud the United States includes a conspiracy to interfere with or obstruct any lawful government function. Right. And free and fair elections are very, very plainly a lawful government function. If that wasn't clear, then in 1996, you might recall, and this is, sort of good ammunition, for the Trump supporting crowd, there were allegations that the Bill Clinton re-election campaign was receiving undue influence from China. With respect to the 1996 election, there was a financier from Little Rock named Charlie Tree, who was a Clinton fundraiser, and he was indicted and pled guilty. He didn't plead guilty to 18 U.S.C. 371. He pled guilty to violations of election laws, but he was charged under 18 U.S.C. 371. And again, in that case, there was no evidence that the Chinese attempt to interfere went anywhere high up in the Clinton campaign organization, but it was investigated, and that was the statute that Republicans thought at the time was appropriate to use if a foreign government was trying to interfere with a U.S. election. And we took it seriously in 1996. We should take it seriously now.
Hey, well, listen, all of this gets me to the real question, which is, when are we going to lock her up? No, I'm kidding. What it actually gets me to, though, is a different question, which is when you talked about this idea of really the path forward, if there are big discoveries from this, would be political wins such that Donald Trump is impeached or sort of forced to resign. What happens to Mike Pence in that situation? In other words, does it just become Pence as president, or what would it take for Pence to be as implicated as Trump in whatever?
So So here's the kind of lengthier answer to that. We do a recurring segment on opening arguments called Yodel Mountain, and the reason we call it that is because I was asked that very question again, week one after Donald Trump assumed office, and in light of the Jared Kushner appointment, what's it going to take to impeach Donald Trump? And my answer was, do you remember the old Price is Right game with the yodeler going up the mountain, and every time you missed by $1, the yodel would, the little mountain climber would climb up. And when you missed by a total of so many dollars, he would reach the top of the mountain and fall off. And that's the way to think about this sort of drip, drip, drip of criminal activities, right? We know the president has committed crimes already. We know that, according to Republicans, it's not serious enough for them to think that those crimes are impeachable. There is a point where the yodeler will fall off the mountain. There is a point where that cumulative effect is so great that even Republicans in safe districts are going to turn on the president. Obviously, we're not there yet. Now, how does that affect Mike Pence? As far as I can tell, there is no evidence that connects Mike Pence up with any of the public investigation to date. I would, wherever you put the probability of Trump being impeached, that you have to set the probability of that applying to Mike Pence at almost zero from what we know right now. So you have to be willing to say, and again, I'm a left of center Democrat, as somebody who does not want to see Mike Pence be president of the United States, that I'll accept that. I'll accept that outcome in order to not have somebody in office who, as far as I can tell, has no public service whatsoever, right? Cares only about enriching himself, his immediate circle of cronies, and his friends.
Yeah, well, now we're getting to more of what I agree with as the political analysis, which is that I believe the best scenario for the left is probably Trump staying, not resigning or being impeached, riddled in scandal, unable to accomplish, or at least able to accomplish as little as possible, and the public spectacle of that leading to a major loss for both Trump and the Republicans in 18 and 20, because I think that if Mike Pence becomes president, he becomes way less scandalous, and his sort of standard right-wing ideologue perspective actually gets a lot of really horrible stuff done.
I respect that point of view. That was the point of view I held in January, sort of pre-inauguration. I have to tell you, I find it knowing, right? Because the predicate of what you've just said is, if Mike Pence is president, we have a much greater risk of aberrant political policies being elected, because Mike Pence is not ridden by scandal and he is a much more competent political operative. I'm willing to take that risk. In my point, and again, I understand how people can come out differently. I'm willing to take that risk at this point because Mike Pence is at least a career civil servant, right? I disagree with his definition of civil service, but he's somebody who operates within the political process. And I believe that he will be deterred, or I believe that he has a stronger chance of being deterred by not engaging in blatantly illegal conduct and not, sort of setting up these irresolvable conflicts than Trump is. And I think he cares about things beyond just lining his pockets and his family's pockets. I get that it's a tough call, but I mean, this is really, as somebody who's been a lawyer for 2 decades and politically active for 3, like, this is not normal, right? It's not usual to have courts handing down injunctions blocking executive orders at 11 o'clock at night on a Thursday, right? Like it is not usual to have, 2 competing courts issuing 2 differing rulings on 2 interpretations of statutes, right? Like this is, we've been put into a position that, like, we survive, and again, I was pretty anti-George W. Bush, but we survived that with our institutions intact. We survived George H.W. Bush. We survived Ronald Reagan. I feel like this is much more of an existential threat.
Hard to argue against that, for sure. We've been speaking with Andrew Torrez. Check out the Opening Arguments show. Thanks so much for talking to us, Andrew. We will definitely do it again.
David, it's always fun to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me on. Have me back.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We're continuing to learn more and more about how significantly taxes would go up for a lot of people under the Trump Republican tax plan. And last week I told you that the Trump tax plan would raise taxes on families earning under $75,000 a year. It would raise taxes significantly on graduate students. And then at the beginning of this week, I told you about how the Republican tax plan would actually raise taxes on more than half of Americans in the long run. Now, to be clear, I'm not against taxes going up or down just in principle or in the abstract, right? But I do believe that if you're campaigning on tax decreases, you shouldn't be raising taxes for more than half of all Americans. And that if you're going to raise taxes, you should really be raising the taxes on the ultra rich who have a bigger and bigger share of the total country's wealth as time has gone on, particularly because taxing them is much better for the economy than increasing taxes on middle income people. Okay, we now have a new report which focuses on seniors. It has been done by the AARP, and it says that 1 out of 5 seniors, about 6.3 million, will either see no change to their taxes or an increase in taxation in 2019. 1.2 million of them would get a tax increase. But remember this thing about how this tax plan contains temporary and permanent provisions, and that once the temporary provisions expire, taxes are going to go up for more than half of all Americans. Once you look at the number of seniors that will see a tax hike, once those temporary provisions phase out, over 5 million seniors will be seeing tax increases as a result of this bill. But the seniors, and I'm talking about not the ultra wealthy ones that are in Donald Trump's cabinet, just regular old folks, right? They're actually going to get screwed twice by the bill, because not only will they see a tax hike in the long term, they will also be on the receiving end of Medicare cuts and cuts to other senior services as a result of this tax bill. And I was thinking back as I read the report to all those terms that Donald Trump likes to use about his harebrained ideas. He calls them, it's a beautiful plan, it's an elegant idea. This is the furthest thing from it, right? Seniors will get screwed. Families earning under 75 grand a year will get screwed. Grad students will get ultra screwed. It's almost like the incredible, overwhelming lion's share of the benefits go to the people who are already really rich, the ultra rich, the obscenely rich, and Donald Trump's own family himself, which of course he says this wouldn't be good for him, but it would be great for him.
Just seems like it's such a politically risky move, though, because the elderly votes. I mean, it's not as if you're targeting young people or just grad students
who aren't going to vote for Trump anyway.
Yeah, but are these older people going to turn around and vote for the Democrat? Maybe not.
Maybe not. And that's why I think it's interesting that the AARP is getting involved, because the AARP, on the one hand, it's a very powerful organization, a lobby, effectively, for seniors. But on the other hand, there's been so much anti-AARP propaganda spreading around right-wing media lately that who knows what effect it will actually have. And there's a rumor, a discussion, that moderate Senate Republicans like Lisa Murkowski, she is in principle opposed to what would be the impact of this bill based on everything we know. But what I read, Pat, is that she's thinking of voting for it in the Senate. Then it will go to reconciliation, and she'll eventually vote against that compromise bill. And she'll be able to say, listen, I'm not against tax reform. I voted for the Senate version. But once we conferenced with the House bill, those House Republicans are not like us. I can't in good faith support it, which is a way to kind of ride the fence and get the benefits from every aspect of this.
Yeah, and I could see some centrist Democrats flipping on this too.
Oh, you think so?
Perhaps?
I hope not. That would be absolutely pathetic. So anyway, that's what's going on. Tax hikes all around. Everybody take one, unless you're really, really rich. A 5-year-old went into a Children's Hospital, Colorado, for a procedure to remove some tissue from underneath the tongue that was causing her sort of a speech impediment, making it difficult to say certain sounds. And it's a story about so many of the things that are wrong with our healthcare system. The doctor who did the procedure said, hey, to the mom, by the way, while your daughter is under anesthesia, we can also pierce her ears. She might like that. And the mom said, okay, that's fine. The bill for the operating room services related specifically to the piercing ended up being $1,877.86, nearly $1,900 for ear piercing. The insurance company said, hey, that's cosmetic and optional. We aren't paying for that. Just because ear piercings are cheap at the mall doesn't mean that they're cheap at a hospital. When a surgeon does ear piercing at a hospital during a surgery, it's no longer a Sunday afternoon at Claire's Accessories at the local mall, right? It is now a surgical ear piercing, which is actually really rare. There's only a few dozen cases that were uncovered by the Healthcare Cost Institute because, again, it's a cosmetic procedure and insurance doesn't cover it when you do it in a hospital. Now, eventually, after a long story that I won't bore you with, the mom made a huge stink and they were given a credit for the ear piercing. It was forgiven as a courtesy by the hospital. But there are many issues here to talk about, right? As far as this hospital is concerned, the mom is saying the doctor suggested that we do this without mentioning that it wouldn't be covered and it's cosmetic. And then they wrote it up as saying that I asked for it, which isn't true. And there's a whole bunch of issues as to whether the hospital and the surgeon were honest about this. But I want to talk about the systemic problems, which are way worse. And the real systemic problem is that $1,877 for ear piercing is actually in line with industry standards for these so-called in-the-hospital surgical ear piercings. And there are endless reasons for this. You can't blame just one thing. Prices go up because insurance will only reimburse part of what the hospital bills. If the hospital wants $150 and insurance usually only pays 75% of what the hospital wants, well, the hospital needs to charge $200 in order to end up with $150. But of course, that's not all. You also have to make up for people who come into the hospital but without insurance at all. You have to treat them, right? You can't turn them away. And a lot of them will never pay at all. So if that accounts for 5% of the dollars you bill, well, you make up for it by adding 5% to all the prices so that it ends up being covered. These are crude numbers, right? But you get the idea. And then on top of that, ear piercing, like everything else, has to conform to the billing protocol, the medical billing protocol that's in place, which means that the doctor needs to spend time writing up the procedure in approved language. In this case, it was a bilateral, the bilateral lobules were prepped with betadine, and an 18 gauge was used to pierce the left lobule in the planned position, blah, blah, blah. That means that medical time is spent describing procedures, often for insurance companies, and that adds to the cost because it's time. And then everything is itemized in a way that you need a professional medical biller to even do it. That is an entire apparatus, the medical billing apparatus, that further increase the cost. So you get the idea. That's how we end up with a $2,000 ear piercing.
Do you think that the doctor suspected that this could have happened or just ignored it altogether?
I don't know.
I mean, you have to be straightforward with the family that this is going to cost you nearly $2,000.
There were some comments saying that the doctors aren't involved in the billing, so they're totally disconnected. Like the doctor genuinely may have just thought, hey, while she's under, let's pierce her ears, with no idea that, hey, these are cosmetic procedures that your insurance won't cover and will cost $2,000. I don't know the answer to that. But the fact that it was written up as something that the mom requested, even though the mom says the doctor offered it, is a little bit suspect. So this is horrible. There's no sign that this is going to get better. And under Trump, if anything, it's going to get even worse. We've got a voicemail number, 2192-DAVID P. Yesterday, someone called in and started reading from some sacred text. I think it was Isaiah. And I said, why? What's the point of calling in with that? The same caller called in and explained why he called and read Isaiah to me. Take a listen to this.
Hi, Dave. I guess I was trying to communicate when I called you the other night about the scriptures. I was just reading them. Basically, all I was trying to demonstrate in a nutshell of about 3 minutes, sorry it took so long, that I believe this is the end of the world, the end of the system of things.
Okay. Well, that clarifies it. We were wondering why he called and read scripture, Pat, and it's because he was trying to explain to me that it's the end of the world. Now it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if the nutshell only took 3 minutes for an explanation, I wonder what the whole thing would have been. It would
Right.
have been like an hour-long lecture.
If the short version of the end of the world was 3 minutes, then I don't even want to know what the long version is. But anyway, we've clarified that. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Trust me, I don't even have time to tell you about it, but you can sign up for the bonus show at davidpakman.com/membership or through making a $5 pledge at patreon.com/davidpakman. See you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.